Hi, everybody. It is Oyama Kunja once again. I am responding to one of our YouTubers who have asked me to look at the user story sizing. Remember, you can find me on YouTube. I am Oyama Kunja, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm also Oyama Kunja on that platform as well. So today we're really looking at story sizes, story sizing. I have included my quote, which I love dearly, which talks to me. Always remember that you are not a hero and everybody needs support at some point. Hey, cool. I think before we get to the user story sizing, perhaps let's start with defining what this user story is, right? A user story is a simple statement about what a user wants and what value they will be getting from that, right? So always a user story is associated with a customer need, as well as in terms of that customer need, what is it that they are going to gain from that? All righty. So a user story normally answers three questions: who, what, and why. They are usually looked at the customer point of view. So, like I said, there is a need from a customer that we need to solve for. They are meant to be relatively small. So, a good user story takes about 3 days to complete. Righty. Cool. Let's get to story sizing. What do we mean when we say story sizing? It is an estimate of how much effort it is required to complete a single story. Why do we do this? Why do we size? One may ask. We want to know the overview scope of the work. We want to know what we're dealing with, what kind of elephant that we're dealing with. We want to use, multiple perspectives to determine the size of the work. So the reason why everybody will be saying, I think this is a 2, I think this is a 1, I think this is an 8, it is because we want to get to the crux of what the story is about, what we need to do, and the perspective from a team at large, so that it's not just one person who is making a final decision to say this is an 8. It also rectifies the false assumptions. So when we go through these user stories, questions are asked. And if there's anything that, the team did not understand or one team member did not understand, then we are all at the same page. There isn't assumptions, but rather we know exactly what is it that we need to do to satisfy this customer need. Who needs to be part of the sizing? It is everybody in the team that is delivering that story. That would be your development team. And when we talk about development team, we're talking about, your devs, your analysts, your testing, your testers, and so on and so on, depending on the structure of the team. Okay. Let's get to story points. Story points are used to represent the relative size of the story, and this is based on complexity and risk. Right. When we talk about complexity, we talk about interdependencies. We consider other outside issues. It could be that, we are familiar with when we doing this particular work, there's normally discrepancies that are there that will disturb us as a team. It could be there is another thing that we need from a certain team, which is really not advisable to take such stories where you've got a dependency on another team. You'd rather just solve those dependencies on from that team so that you can easily just work on that without any disturbances. And then we look at things like effort, how much amount of work is required to complete that story. It could be, for example, a story could be something very simple to do, but even though it is simple, but there's a lot of work that is required for you to complete that work. So we also look at the effort, we look at the implementation, we consider, factors like your deployment process or path to production. Is it an easy deployable story, or is it difficult? Again, depending on what the team does in the sprint. When they complete their story in that sprint, they go to production. So implementation would also form a part of that story sizing. We also look at the risk, right? Which is the team skills and experiences. Remember, I said we're not heroes. So it depends in terms of how much experience we have as a team. Is it something that we have worked on this? Is it something that is new to all of us? Like we are blank, we don't know what we really need to do. So we look at those things. Have we worked on a similar thing before? Will it be just a quick story for us because we have worked on something like this before? So those are the things that, we sort of look at when we are doing story sizing points. Hey, all righty. So there are mistakes that we need to avoid when we are doing our story sizing. Things like translating stories into hours, right? We are not talking about hours. Remember, our experiences are not the same. So that is why we are not changing this into hours, right? Something that one team member may take 2 hours to complete, another team member may take 3 hours because our skills are really not the same, right? And also averaging out the story points. Say, for example, someone else says it's a 5, and then someone else says it's a 2, and then you just add that and average out and say, okay, well, team, it is a 3. So we do not average the stories out, but rather we ensure that we understand as a team what needs to be done, and we come up with one story point number that represents our user story. Okay, so we usually use Fibonacci sequence to size, that is, starting from 0, 1, 2, 3 up to 100, right? If you look at this graph, it is exactly a representation of how we do it. For example, if we say story 1 is a 1, ne? And then we go to another story, and if we look at the second story, it is double the other story. So we add a 1 plus 1 and we get a 2, right? Which means the first story is bigger than the other one. So you can take one story. I normally don't advise to have a story size that is a 1, because if you say that is your 1, it means you can never ever have a story that is less than that, but rather maybe start with a 2, and then other stories look at them from that 2 and say, okay, perhaps I think this one is bigger than a 2. Is it a little bigger than a 2? Does it mean if I add a 1 on it, it gives me a 3, or what? So you look at it like that. Okay, so what we normally do is what is called POCA planning, right? So I'm just going to take you through this process, how a Scrum Master or anybody who's assisting a team to do that planning would go about it. So they would first select a user story, a PO, a solution analyst, business analyst, Scrum Master will go through that story, and the team members will ask questions if there's questions, and they will answer any of those questions that are being asked by the team. And then the first round of voting will then occur. All righty. And if this now is there's a large variety of sizing, then it means that we need to go through another round, right? Once we go through the second round, we try take the other one and understand why one is saying it's a 5, and whereas one is saying it's a 1. And then once they give their meaning, and everybody now is at the same point and they understand what the requirement really is, and then we'll do another round of testing. We will do this 3 times. And if after 3 times we still don't agree as a team in terms of what size the story is, we will then pack the story and put it on the backlog, because it means we do not understand what the story is and we will need to refine it. Okay, but if the story is not large and everybody there isn't variety of sizing, there's just one, perhaps everyone is saying it's a 3, then it's all good. We move on to the next story. Making sense? Cool. All righty. I hope I did justice. Okay, so what I've done in the past with my team, because remember, in different teams, a 1 can mean different things, right? So what I've done in my teams is that I've come up with something like a matrix that will help us as a team to sort of identify whether a story is a 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and a 13. And normally anything that is bigger than a 13, me and my team, we do not take that. We break that story further because it means that story is too big, right? So what we look at is that a 1 is a minimum in terms of complexity, and it has obviously less risk or no risk at all. And then a 2 is also a minimum in terms of complexity and also a minimum in terms of risk. But this minimum is a minimum that is bigger than a 1, obviously. So if you would add the 2, it will give you a 2 of somehow. And then a 3 would be mild in terms of complexity, mild in risk. And then a 5, moderate. And then an 8, severe, and then 13 would be maximum. That means the story is indeed difficult. Maybe it can even take a week or even over a week for us to complete that particular one story. Okay. All righty. So what I've done is that I've taken just a sample of a user story that would be perhaps a need of a banker that they would like to do. For example, this one is looking at a banking customer. I want to access or view summary of my savings. So what is it? What are the questions that you start asking as a team? Do you ask yourself, is there a service that is already existing that we can access that information from a database? I'm assuming that there is already information in a database that is there that is accessible. But now you ask a question, is there a service that we need to build for this? Okay. Is there a UI presentation of this? Or is there a change in an existing UI? Or is it a completely new UI that we need to create for this? And then you also look at the platform. Is it a digital platform like your perhaps mobile, iOS and Android? Is it a web application? And then as a team, you then discuss it among yourselves. When you get all the answers, you then start sizing the story and say, okay, fine, the service is already existing, the information is there, UI is already present. We just need now to just add the summary as part of that UI. Okay, perhaps this is simple enough. We've done something like this before. It's quite simple because, I mean, there's existing services, there's existing screen, and therefore we think as a team, this is obviously just mild for us. So it is things like that. And I do hope I've done justice to your question, Yechuva. And I think everybody who had some questions around the user stories, maybe there are questions, answers in terms of sizing. I know this one normally is a problem. And, you know, for most teams, they're not able to do their sizing correctly. But yeah, size will differ per team, and in terms of how they define their sizing as well, in terms of how they will size as a team will also differ. So it is no by any means that I think you can say you measure the progress of the team against. That is my opinion. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to follow us and like us on YouTube. Thank you.